Welcome back to Business RadioX Pro Tip. Payton and Lee Kantor here with you. Lee, what are some practical ways to get more podcast listeners?
Yeah, these are some ways that I encourage our guests on the shows and our sponsors of the shows, if they're so inclined to want to build an audience around their show, there are some things that they have to be doing. These aren't kind of things that are nice to be doing, but these are the must-do things. If you want to build an audience of podcast listeners and get your podcast in front of more and more people so that they are listeners to your show, you have to do some of these things. Number one, you have to optimize your podcast for SEO. Your podcast has to be found. If people aren't finding your podcast, they're not going to know it even exists. You have to actively promote each episode on social media multiple times, not just one time, not like here's my latest episode. You have to do each episode multiple times and not just on one social media platform, on all of them. Number three, you should collaborate with other podcasters that do similar podcasts that you do. Let them be a guest on your show. You be a guest on their show. You have to leverage email marketing to promote and build a database of listeners. Every time there's an episode, it should be shared with all the people that you know. It should be shared with an email list just for podcast listeners and podcast fans. You have to be letting them know new episodes exist. You have to let them know that, you're looking for guests. You have to leverage that kind of relationship through email. Number five, you should speak on webinars and other virtual platforms to promote your podcast. This is something that you should be actively doing to get your name and your show in front of different people in different ways. Another thing to do is advertise on complimentary podcasts. If there's other podcasts out there, do some sort of ad swap where you let their listener know, hey, listen to this other show. It also talks about this subject, and advertise on podcasts that your audience might be interested in that's totally separate from your kind of industry. Number seven, make sure your podcast is on every podcast directory and every relevant list. If there's a list of top podcasts for whatever subject you're on, make sure you're on that list. Make sure they know you exist so they can add you to the list next time. Make sure that you're on every single podcast directory, including obviously all of the major ones like Spotify and Apple and Google and Amazon and iHeartRadio. Make sure you're on every single podcast directory that's out there so people can find you when they're looking for what you're doing. And then finally, consider paid ads on social media. Consider paid ads in podcast directories and search engines like Google. If you do all of those 8 things relentlessly, then you will build an audience and you will give your podcast the best chance to build as big of an audience as you desire.